So, House Blackfyre has to be one of, if not my favorite house in A Song of Ice and Fire. I've always found the idea of a Targaryen cadet branch to be utterly fascinating, and I'm somewhat surprised that there aren't more outside of the Blackfyres. Now, of course, you could make the argument that there are other branches of the family out there, considering that the Targaryens didn't marry within the family all the time. The Velaryons have Targaryen blood stemming from the days of Aegon's conquest, and House of the Dragon. The Martells have Targaryen blood through some marriage pacts. The Baratheons also have Targaryen blood through a princess, and possibly Orys Baratheon, who could have been the half-brother to Aegon the Conqueror. Even House Penrose from the books has Targaryen blood. But even with that being said, I don't necessarily consider these families to be cadet branches, as their identities are so far removed from the main line of Targaryens, and none of them, in my opinion at least, are so pivotal in shaping the story of A Song of Ice and Fire and the Targaryen family, as well as many others, like the Blackfyres are. Now, to make things make sense for those who don't know, House Blackfyre is a cadet branch of House Targaryen, founded by a guy named Daemon Blackfyre. He was named after Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, who you may recognize from House of the Dragon, but originally his birth name was Daemon Waters. He was the bastard son of King Aegon IV, also known as Aegon the Unworthy. He was known for sleeping around, and probably had more illegitimate children than Robert Baratheon. I'm pretty sure a decent portion of Westeros' population is related to this guy, but I digress. Daemon Waters was his favorite child. In fact, he liked him more than his true-born son, Daeron Targaryen, who would later be known as Daeron the Good. He hated his son Daeron, and his own sister wife Nerys. It got to the point where he even started rumors that Daeron wasn't his son, and that his wife had cheated on him with his brother, Aemon, the Dragon Knight, and that he was the real father of Daeron. But these rumors didn't go anywhere because Aemon demanded a trial by combat to put these rumors to bed and defend his sister's honor. But still, this didn't stop Aegon from hating. He gave the family sword Blackfyre, the sword of Aegon the Conqueror, a symbol of generations of Targaryen might and rule, not to his true-born son Daeron, but to the bastard Daemon. It even allowed him to take the name of the sword as his new surname. It was a real slap in the face. But perhaps worst of all, upon his deathbed, he legitimized all of his illegitimate children, strengthening their claims to the Iron Throne and giving them all the right to inherit it. This single act is what jump-started the Blackfyre rebellions, with rumors that Daeron wasn't the king's true-born son still floating around, and the clear favoritism he showed to Daemon when he was alive, not to mention giving him the family sword. Many people assumed that Daemon Blackfyre was the rightful king of Westeros. He bore the sword, and seemed to be the son his father chose. But he would never become king. He would launch a failed rebellion that would lead to his death and the death of his eldest sons, Aegon and Aemon, and lay the foundation for decades of animosity between House Blackfyre and House Targaryen, which would give way to 5 more failed attempts to place a black dragon on the Iron Throne, and countless deaths across Westeros, including many Blackfyre descendants. And there's even speculation that a 6th rebellion might be in the works as well, which may lead to even more death and destruction. But what if none of this had come to pass? How could the story have changed if the very first Blackfyre rebellion, and all that came after, never happened in the first place? Let's find out. First off, how would a scenario like this realistically not come to pass and be possible? The answer is pretty simple in my opinion, and it all comes down to Daemon Blackfyre simply choosing not to, which I know that is such a groundbreaking way to go about things. But why would he even do something like this? Well, a simple change in mindset, or expanding upon a possible existing one. Let me explain. Despite having a reason to, and the ability to do so, I believe what determines what happens in regards to rebellion is simply whether or not he wants to do it. Daemon does have a solid foundation when it comes to being a claimant for the Iron Throne, but ultimately, what pushed him to claim the Iron Throne was other people. Even after he was legitimized, he played nice with his brother Daeron. He didn't immediately jump to claim the Iron Throne for himself. People had to convince him to do this, like his brother Aegor Rivers, also known as Bittersteel, and Quentyn Ball, also known as Fireball in the books. For a time, he just seemed content playing nice with his half-brother, And there's a very easy way to reach this conclusion about him not wanting the throne. Outside of being favored by their father, being encouraged to take the Iron Throne by others, and having legitimate symbols of power to back his claim, Daemon has no real reason to go against his brother. Daemon, by all accounts, treated Daemon very well. He never ridiculed him for being an affair baby, he never tried to take back the family sword, he never badmouthed him in public. He even gave Daemon a wife and lands near the capital to build his own keep for his family. He did right by his brother, and that treatment could easily instill a sense of loyalty that deters him from this path of treachery. It's kind of a don't bite the hand that feeds you kind of situation. He recognizes how good he has it right now and doesn't want to jeopardize it. In addition to this, I believe Daemon would reflect on his life and status in the world, and this would also act as a deterrent for him. Basically what I mean here, in Westeros, bastard children are seen as less than dirt, and destined for treachery and evil, all on the account of being born out of wedlock. Knowing that this stigma is following him, and knowing that he has a brother that cares for him and aids him would make him more determined to stay loyal, because he doesn't want to feed into that stereotype, which would also be a bad look for him if he were to become king. Even if he was favored by Aegon, Daemon also seems to favor him, or at least respect him in some way. Maybe they aren't best friends, but still, he cares enough to look out for him when others would try to get rid of him as they would see him as a threat. With context like that, building his reign on the blood of a caring brother and his family would make him look terrible to some, and potentially stain his kingly image, as he would feed into that stigma of how evil illegitimate children really are. This alone could cause him to refrain from rebelling. So with that in mind, how exactly do I see this story playing out, and what is the result of it all? So like I said in this timeline, Daemon is still pushed to rebel by others, the main perpetrator of this being his brother Aegor Rivers. He does his best to push Daemon towards rebelling against Daemon for his own sake, but the Black Dragon refuses. His life the way it is now is pretty good without a crown. People respect him, his brother respects him, he has a wife, more children than he knows what to do with, and starting a war would put all of that at risk. Even if he did win the war, what would that do to his reputation? More importantly, if he went to war, there was no guarantee that he or his family would survive long enough to see the end of it. They could all perish in the conflict, and despite his prowess as a warrior, Daemon knows all it would take is one well-placed blade, one bad fall from a horse, or one well-placed arrow that could ruin everything. Was the blood of his family really worth an iron chair? Did he want to prove a stigma? Be an instrument for other houses to gain power through him, or get vengeance against perceived wrongs? No. So he shuts out Bittersteel and continues on with his life, never declaring himself the king who bore the sword. Now, things would not end here. Throughout his life, there would always be whispers from instigators who swear that Daemon should be king, that his brother is weak, too friendly with the Dornish, and it's clear who Aegon IV wanted to be his heir. Bittersteel would be at the forefront of these talks, and each time trying to get his brother to reconsider his offer, to get Daemon to pick up the sword and rebel. But each time, the Black Dragon would refuse. Now I'm sure some of you may be wondering, if Bittersteel wants House Targaryen ousted so badly and Daemon is refusing, why doesn't he do it himself? He's one of, if not the biggest advocate for hostile takeover by House Blackfyre. Even in canon, he supported most of the Blackfyre rebellions and wars for the throne. But it's important to note that while he was heavily involved with a lot of these attempts at power, he was never at the head of it. He never displayed an ambition for the throne itself. All he wanted to see was a Blackfyre king, even in his death. Is this because the Blackfyres were the coolest house alive? Maybe, but also it could be a bit deeper, which is why I don't see him making his own power play in the face of Daemon's refusal. And it's based on who he is. Even if he did want the throne, Bittersteel wasn't favored by King Aegon. He wasn't given the family sword, and while he was a good fighter, Daemon had more notoriety in combat than he did. Daemon Blackfyre looked like a strong Targaryen king, like the conqueror come again, or at least how history thought Aegon was. Daemon actually had a legitimate position as a claimant to the Iron Throne, one a person could get behind and respect, unlike Aegor. Supporting Daemon seemed like a valid political play, something that was respectable, honorable even. It makes sense given all of the factors. You can see a future king when you look at Daemon Blackfyre, but not Aegor Rivers. I feel like it's definitely a Stannis and Renly kind of situation, where one brother is a leader and a good fighter, he can definitely lead an army, but he inspires no love or loyalty like the other one does, so no one would support him even if he wanted to claim the throne for himself. He needs Daemon, because his brother actually has some weight to his name, and symbols of power and legitimacy that make him look good in the eyes of the people. So Aegor trying to launch the Bittersteel rebellion would be dead before it even started, because of who he is as a person. So he meets a dead end. But I believe that as the years pass, he will continue to try now and then to get his brother to reconsider his offer. And, like I said, every time the answer would be no. I could see it getting to the point where Bittersteel is so persistent that Daemon eventually rats him out to Daeron because he doesn't want to get caught up in these schemes anymore. This will result in him being taken prisoner and most likely sent off to the wall by his half-siblings, though Bloodraven would push that he be executed instead. He was all about killing the opposition when you had the chance. But King Daeron the Good is nothing if not merciful. With him gone, I hardly see much conflict happening in this timeline, as the rebellions were such a focal point during this period. But there would be a plethora of changes that would occur here. But before we get to those, I do want to say that even if Daemon stays loyal in this timeline, he would most likely still die early when the Great Spring Sickness sweeps over Westeros. This pandemic took many lives, highborn and low, including that of the king and two of his heirs, his grandsons. I believe it would also count some losses within the Blackfyre family, with Daemon Blackfyre dying and some of his children, as they remain in Westeros instead of fleeing overseas like they did in canon. I'm willing to bet that he and his oldest son Aegon are some of the ones that die within the family, and Aemon, second son to Daemon Blackfyre and twin brother to Aegon Blackfyre, is the one to take up his father's lordship and the sword Blackfyre for himself. The reason for this being is kind of because this is what happened in canon during the Battle of the Red Grass Field. Daemon and Aegon were the first to die during this battle, showered by arrows that were fired by Bloodraven. Then Aemon took up the sword Blackfyre after seeing his father and brother die, before dying himself to the same arrows. It's a neat way to bring that back into play, but maybe this time Aemon will actually get to live a long life, even after the deaths of his father and brother. But unfortunately, his father Daemon, his life in this timeline, despite the noble deed of loyalty, comes to an end early. Not in a field of blood and glory, but in a bed with a cough. It's a tragic event, but eventually the realm will recover. And I would argue even thrive. In the absence of the Blackfyre rebellions, there would be some major alterations to Westeros that would really change the story moving forward. A great example of this is the Peak Uprising. Now, let me give you guys some lore in case you guys don't know who the Peaks are and why this is so important. House Peak supported House Blackfyre during the very first Blackfyre rebellion, and when they lost, they had some of their land taken away as a consequence. Gorman Peak was pretty upset and supported the second Blackfyre rebellion, which failed before it even began, because Daemon II, who was also a son of Daemon I, didn't have anyone to fight for him, and he was eventually taken prisoner by Bloodraven, and Gorman Peak was executed for his treason. And this is what caused the Peak Uprising. Now you may be wondering, what does this random house and random conflict have to do with anything involving the story? And it's actually really simple, and really intriguing when you think about it. Tywin Lannister. We all know Tywin to be one of the most feared and respected men in the Seven Kingdoms. No one would dare cross the Great Lion of the West. But a long time ago, Tywin's father Tytos actually wasn't in line to inherit Casterly Rock. Tytos had two older brothers, Tywald and Tion, and Tywald died in the Peak Uprising, leaving his brother Tion as heir to Casterly Rock. Then Tion died during the Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion, leaving Tytos and later Tywin to inherit Casterly Rock instead. But with the Blackfyre rebellions removed, there was no Peak Uprising. There won't be a fourth Blackfyre rebellion, if there ever is a Blackfyre rebellion to begin with. If the older brothers of Tytos live on the account of Daemon's loyalty and that of his children, then Tywin will never inherit Casterly Rock. Cersei, Jaime, and Tyrion won't be the main branch of the Lannister family. But that's not even the most intriguing part about this. If Tywin never becomes Lord of Casterly Rock, then House Rain, the Red Lions of Castamere, will not go extinct. Remember, in canon, Tywin is the reason that these guys are no longer around in Westeros. He killed all of them. The Reynes, the Tarbecks, he got rid of them because they disrespected his family. But now, he doesn't have the power to wipe the family off the map anymore, as he's not in line as heir to Casterly Rock. He no longer has the resources. But more importantly than that, the main reason that the Reynes will not go extinct is actually because the Reynes will be a part of the main Lannister family line. For some context, Lady Ellen Reyne, the woman who started all this conflict with the Red Lions and the Gold and caused her family's extinction, she was originally supposed to marry Tywald Lannister, the older brother of Tytos. Then he died. Then she was going to marry Tion. Then he died, and she even tried getting Tytos to leave his wife for her. Eventually, she married into the Tarbeck family, but she still found ways to use the Reynes to manipulate Tytos, who was also known as the Laughing Lion, for his very weak will. The Reynes made him lend them gold that they would never pay back, which is why Tywin hunted them all down and made them go extinct, because he would not tolerate being made a laughingstock like his father. So if Ellen is allowed to become the Lady of Casterly Rock as originally planned, her family won't be wiped out. And assuming her husbands don't let the Reynes get away with extorting them, then they have no reason to attack the Reynes in the first place because they won't feel disrespected. So as a result, another great family remains alive in Westeros. But unfortunately, this means we'll never get the Reigns of Castamere song. But moving on. I feel like it's very hard to say what would happen in the long run with the Blackfyre family now being a part of Westeros, and potentially being involved in politics later on as well. These are new people, new minds, and ideologies that we have present, so what they do is a genuine mystery that is largely up for speculation. Though one thing I do see happening at some point is that House Blackfyre does make a bid for the Iron Throne, albeit in a less bloody manner than it was in canon. A great point where I see this happening is during the council that's held after the death of King Mycor, where they're trying to determine who would be the next king of Westeros. At the time, the only options were a baby named Maegor, whose father drank wildfire, and people were afraid that he was going to be crazy like his dad, and possibly his namesake. Then there was Maester Aemon, who refused the throne because of his Maester vows, and Aegon, aka Egg from Dunk and Egg, who spent so much time with the common people that they didn't think he would be a good fit to be king. But, interestingly enough, there was also a guy named Aenys Blackfyre who showed up to put his claim forward for the Iron Throne. Peacefully, in fact, unlike the people who came before him. But he was killed by Bloodraven, which got Bloodraven sent to the Wall and later on stuck in a magic tree. In this timeline, I could actually see the Blackfyres being allowed to make a claim to the Iron Throne without being executed. They'd even be respected. After all, they're technically still Targaryens. They were legitimized by Aegon the Unworthy and still had his sword Blackfyre. Not to mention, the mother of Daemon Blackfyre was actually another Targaryen woman named Dana the Defiant. She was the cousin of Aegon IV. So, by all accounts, he was a purebred Targaryen. It was only the circumstances of his birth and his name that were different. If Aemon Blackfyre were alive, depending on his personality and views, it is reasonable to assume that he or his children could be made into the new rulers of the Seven Kingdoms. A Blackfyre could take control without having to spill any blood, given the lack of options that they had on hand. The Black Dragon could finally replace the Red, and no one had to die for it. But as plausible as that sounds, I also believe that this would be asking for issues, because at the end of the day, the Blackfyres are still a branch of legitimized bastards, and not part of the main line of Targaryens. They bear the sword, but like I said before, not the name. This could be begging for future problems with the descendants of Aegon, or whoever else who feels that they have a claim, starting a new civil war, but led by a red dragon and not a black one, which is an interesting thought to ponder, a reverse of the canon situation. But even so, there is another way I could see the Blackfyres coming into power peacefully. Given how fond of mirroring within the family the Targaryens can be, I think it makes perfect sense that at some point, you would see marriages between House Blackfyre and Targaryen, since they're virtually indistinguishable from each other. One instance I definitely see this occurring is assuming that the entire story goes the exact same way as it did before. Egg becomes Aegon V, dies at Summerhall, then some years later his grandson Aerys becomes king, and Rhaegar is still born. A big part of Aerys' story is that he wanted a Valyrian bride for Prince Rhaegar, to keep the bloodline pure. But there weren't any options around. He settled for Elia Martell because she was descended from a Targaryen princess, but he still hated her because she was Dornish. If the Blackfyres are still kicking, though, it stands within reason that he would look to them for a possible marriage pact with his son, before anyone else, solely built on the foundation of Valyrian supremacy. By all means, they're the closest related to House Targaryen at this point, and would probably look nigh indistinguishable from them. And depending on how fruitful that marriage is, then Rhaegar may not run off with Lyanna and ruin a bunch of lives in the process trying to have a prophecy baby. So a union between the Black Dragon and the Red could save a lot of lives. If the Blackfyres had ever rebelled in general, then that would leave so many people alive, and history would be altered forever. A Song of Ice and Fire might not even be a Song of Ice and Fire, at least how you know it when you get into the gritty details of everything. But that's all I have for today, just my 2 cents of conversation. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, tell me your thoughts down below, and I will see you all next time.